In your work with immigrants in Ireland, how do you define a global citizen?
My name is Joseph. The way I would define a global citizen is somebody that is very much aware of global trends. That would think about. I'll give you an example. We say in Ireland we eat quite a lot of bananas, probably maybe 5 million of them a week. Really, if you are a global citizen, you would actually think about as to where are they being planted, who's actually harvesting them, how much water is used, how much land is used for us to be able to consume so much. And as you know, a banana is a seasonal fruit, and we have them 365 days of the year. So that's how I would describe somebody with some global awareness.
So do you think it's more about travel, or is it about a mindset of openness, what you were talking about there with the banana?
I think travel is part of it. I suppose when you travel, you get ideas, you meet people with different perspectives. That is if you're engaging with people at the level that you find them. It's also about the mindset. So the mindset has to be the mind that is full of empathy, that it has openness in approach. That is willing to learn, that is eager, that is probably, what do I always say, positive curiosity.
That's a nice way of putting it. So many people think global citizen replaces local patriotism. How do you see people balancing their love for their home country with their new life in Ireland?
I think this is a very good question. For people to think that global citizen will replace local patriotism, I think in plain language, that's hogwash. Because when you come into a country, you're supposed to embrace the cultures. You don't have to follow them, but you have to appreciate the cultures. And I think for most people, really, it's a fear of the unknown. For someone new that is making their life, they have to make themselves available to the community that they've moved in. As you're aware, this is where you basically gain your social capital. And one of the most important things that you could do is to volunteer in your local organizations, because by doing so, you meet the locals and you then gain local knowledge, which is really, really key in you integrating in those communities. So it's a two-way kind of a way. Yes, all over the world, difference is looked upon with curiosity, but it's to extend that hand so that people know who you are and you know who they are. And you can only do that by reaching out.
Do you think the idea of active citizenship is really important, and do you think that can be a challenge for some cultures coming in?
Yeah, active citizenship can be a challenge and a huge barrier in that sense, in terms of the fact that some people might not have the language. The language is very key, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in France, whether it's here in Ireland. English is a difficult language. For some people, that would probably have moved here due to circumstances not of their making, and they could have come from a rural background where they have never actually attended a school, so they have literacy challenges from their own language, let alone then to learn a new language. So that can really make life difficult for somebody to integrate.
Can you share a story of specific immigrants you've worked with who've arrived feeling like a stranger but successfully built a home in a new culture?
Yes, I have so many stories. So a few years ago, that is 2008, I was involved in a resettlement program for Sudanese refugees that have been in the camps in Uganda. and they came here to Ireland through UN resettlement program. So they had never lived in modern, what you would call modern houses. All their lives they've been in tents and makeshift accommodation. They had the central running water from the boreholes, no electricity, obviously. So they had to be recycled here. And the challenge then was, how do you get them to function in a new space? And so that on its own was a challenge. But I suppose with the local services coming in together, and I'm talking from education to health to local authority to the guards, the police service, to residents, that collaboration can actually make the life of new people to make the place their new home. And I had the opportunity to work with the young people that had come in. There was 16 of them, and they were all going into the schools in the locality. And we had to work with the Department of Education as to how they would be familiarized within the education system. And yeah, very successful project. And they all went through their education. They've completed their education. And we have some of those young people are in the police service, in the guards. And some of them are in education. Some are doing their masters. Some have married and they have had kids. And some are in the defense force as well. Some went into the defense force. I think there's 4 lads that I worked with that went into the defense force. So they're integrated, they're Irish citizens. And that project on its own, when I look at it, it shows that where there is collaboration and working together and all the agencies pulling together, it is possible to recycle other people from another culture.
So what is one practical thing a local person can do to make an immigrant feel like a citizen and not just a guest?
That's a difficult question. I suppose it's to reach out. One practical thing really that a local person can do to make an immigrant feel like a citizen, not a guest, is to reach out to that person and actually get to know that person without any prejudice, without any labels. And I suppose that applies to everybody else, really. I think you should meet the person, not the label. And that always works, I think. So really, there is not much there. If you work on your own misconceptions as a person before you meet another person, I suppose that's a very good start.
Oh, what's the biggest misconception Irish locals have about the new arrivals you work with?
The biggest misconception Irish locals have about the new arrivals that I work with is there's actually many, to be honest with you. They come from a really poor background, that they are not educated, that they are here to sponge on the social welfare and services without actually really talking to the person and actually finding out why the person is here. The person could be a doctor, they could be a solicitor with migration. You don't have to think about the negative stereotypicals as to why people move. So there is a world out there, and people can decide to say, if they have the means, they can decide to say, you know what, today or in the next 5 years, I want to move to South America. The most intriguing thing is that when you listen to, say, podcasts and you listen to documentaries about Irish people that have moved to overseas, it's an adventure. So everyone, irrespective of what your background is, people take those chances and they travel around the world, and it's an adventure if you can afford it, if you have the means. And so not everyone that we see is somebody that has come here to sponge. I think people like that are in the minority.